This is Pinus canariensis, Canary Island pine, and it is an evergreen conifer. This is where you're seeing these filmed is in Northern California in a hot inland valley during the summer. And well, the filming's actually in the winter, but during the summer it does get quite hot, and these are very hot, heat tolerant as well as cold tolerant. I've never seen these have issues at temperatures down in the teens and Fahrenheit, as well as in the summer. This gets into the hundreds on a regular basis during the summer, and as well as being very drought tolerant. My neighbor has 6 of these that are probably 25 years old plus or minus, and they're about 50 feet tall, and his are on a slope that gets no water for 5 to 6 months during the heat of the summer. So they're very drought tolerant, and his look just fine. They don't seem to stress from that at all. So in design, what these are really good for is if you've got taller structures, these are great to kind of scale that. Here you see a tall high-rise on the right, and then on the left you've got a row of these pines, and they're being used to screen a parking structure from the people who are working in the building. And it's kind of a nice effect here where you've got a clean separation of 2 vertical elements, and one feels natural and the other is the building. And so I thought I'd use that as an example. These look like they're planted about 12 to 15 feet on center. And height-wise, yeah, I would say again, these ones next to me are about 50 feet tall, and they're probably 25 years old plus or minus. So expect maybe a couple of feet of growth a year out of them once they're established. So let's get into maintenance. There's not a lot of maintenance on these. They have a nice clean growth pattern to begin with. My neighbor opened theirs up last year for the first time ever, but Canary Island pines really don't need that in any kind of regular fashion. I'd say if these were cleaned up every 5 years or so, that would be fine. So the bigger issue with a mess is here I'm showing the beginnings of the flower, and you don't really think of pines in terms of flowers, but that head that you see right there will turn into a bunch of little packets that fall off that are kind of the size of a caterpillar, and they create quite a mess. Also, here's the needle droppage. So I'll speak to that because I've lived with it for some time. In the spring, the flower will happen, and they drop a lot of, produce a lot of pollen, and then those little caterpillar size packets, they all fall to the ground. So that does create a bit of a mess, and the way they've used them here with ivy underneath is pretty smart, really, because then that can just fall into the under story or the ground cover. But then in midsummer, these do a needle drop, and most pines do that. They have this cycle where they shed the older needles, and then they do a big push, and they put on a whole section of new needles, and that's where the mess really occurs. My neighbors, they probably drop needles for a solid month and a half to 2 months in the middle of summer, and then follow that with the new growth cycle. So be aware that if you're going to use these will create some mess over a prolonged period of time, and you just want to be aware of that from a maintenance standpoint. So I would say establish these on deep irrigation where you can to help them become more drought tolerant with time. And again, I think these are best suited for commercial applications. This is a lot of tree for a residence, and so I'd say probably not the best use in that regard. But in design, I'd say for if you've got taller structures around that can handle this, these are a really nice tree, and they look great in groupings, as you see here. I almost always seem to see them in groups, and I think they come off very nicely that way. So that's Canary Island pine, Pinus canariensis.